So yesterday we were talking about the French and Indian War, and we looked at the prompt, and you were writing a introductory paragraph that had context and a thesis statement. So I wanted to go over a couple of things before you start on the outline and clear up a couple of misunderstandings, but also help you understand what your LEQ essay looks like in its entirety. So this image kind of breaks down and lets you see the essay format. If you look, you've got your introductory paragraph, which consists of your big picture contextualization. And we talked about this is like the 5 W's. It kind of lays out the who, what, when, where, why of an event. For this specific event, we would be the French and Indian War. And then it gives your thesis statement, which has 3 parts to it. And if you look at the LEQ rubric, you can see that context and thesis are each 1 point. So in your introductory paragraph, you can earn up to 2 points towards your total of 6 points for the actual essay. And the thesis is really important because your thesis statement is really the outline of the rest of your paper. So how you construct your thesis statement is giving an outline of how the rest of your paper is going to be constructed. Your body paragraph we know is going to have evidence, but if we look down here at these last 2 points, your thesis statement is also helping to construct your analysis and your reasoning. So for example, you earn 1 point for using historical reasoning to frame the structure of your essay. So for this type of essay, it's a turning point essay. We're going to look at continuity and change over time. That's the easiest way to construct this essay. So what I want to be doing in my introduction is talking about things that caused the French and Indian War, who it was fought between, and then my thesis statement is going to help explain how the war is changing the relationship between Britain and the United States. And then in my conclusion, if we look back here, our conclusion restates our thesis and it makes some connections. It's going to make connections to events that happen after. So we've got the before events. We've kind of are talking about how the war is impacting the relationship and then what happens after that. And then the second point is where we demonstrate a complex historical understanding. And we can do this by explaining both continuity and change over time. And so for a turning point type of prompt, it's easy to say, okay, here are 2 reasons why this event was a turning point and 1 reason why it was not a turning point. So we can analyze something that changes, but also something that stays the same. And so we want to construct that in our thesis statement. So our thesis statement has 3 parts to it, and we want to construct it in a way that would help us organize the rest of our essay. Our body paragraphs will take the first part of your thesis statement for body paragraph 1. You're going to give evidence, and then you'll have a summary sentence to finish it off. So a body paragraph is kind of like a mini essay within your overall essay. And so the evidence is where we get the middle points of our rubric. You're giving specific examples, and then you use those examples to support your thesis statement. So let's look at an essay outline. You can just copy and paste your context and thesis statement that you wrote yesterday onto this outline. Make sure that I've given you some feedback on that on Google Classroom first. So if I told you, okay, this looks good to go, you can copy and paste it. But if I gave you some feedback on things that you need to correct, make those corrections and then put your context and thesis on here for your introductory paragraph. Your body paragraph, you're going to take the first part of your thesis statement. You're going to write an introductory sentence with that, and then you're going to give specific pieces of evidence. Now, evidence has to be specific. So these can be terms that you got from your anchor points where you were doing those. These can be some of those events that we talked about on the timeline that you did leading up to the Revolutionary War. That's why we made those Padlet timelines so that you could use those to draw specific evidence for this assignment. And then you're going to have a concluding sentence. So each of the body paragraphs is going to be laid out the same way. I put an essay outline example on here. So this is a different prompt, but you can tell I've got 3 parts to my thesis. My first part of my thesis says that the Americans won the Revolutionary War because they allied with the French. So in my first body paragraph, I'm talking about the alliance between the French and the United States and why it was so important. My second reasoning of my thesis statement was the unconventional war tactics that the Patriots used. So my second body paragraph says the Patriots used unconventional war tactics to attack the British and win battles. And then I'm giving specific examples of that. And then the same thing with body paragraph 3. And then in my conclusion, you're simply going to restate your thesis. This can be the exact same version of the thesis statement that you used in your introductory paragraph. And then you want to connect this to later events. So for example, in this essay, I'm connecting it to events that happened after the American Revolutionary War. In your essay outline, you might make connections to things that happen like the beginning of the Revolutionary War or the Declaration of Independence, or maybe the end of the war later, depending on how far you go in your body paragraphs. So we're trying to do two simultaneous things. And I know it's complicated, and I know it's even more complicated because we're trying to do this virtually instead of in the classroom. But what we're trying to do in this paper outline is create a thesis statement that's creating the structure of our essay. And in that thesis statement, we want to be able to earn both of these points. And so we want a statement that's going to be able to help us do change over time. So for example, if I'm talking about that the British are limiting the Americans after the French and Indian War, I'm starting with like the proclamation line. And then I'm moving into things that happen after that. I'm trying to do it chronologically. Always think that you want your writing to be chronological. So you want to start from earliest events and go to later. That's the thought process that you want to use. And then the second thing that we're trying to do is having that split thesis statement, where if we can say two things that are changing in the relationship because of the French and Indian War and one thing that's staying the same. I think it's typically easier to do your thing that stays the same first and then do what's changing after that. So for example, if I was doing this prompt and I had a thesis statement, I might say, okay, so the French and Indian War does not change the mercantilist relationship between the colonists and the British, but it does create new taxes that are placed on the colonists, which eventually create the movement that leads to the Revolutionary War. And so what I could say in looking at the mercantilist policy doesn't change, that would be my body paragraph 1. I could talk about things like the Navigation Acts and things like that are still being put into place. I could talk about that Britain is still the colonists' number one trading partner and things like that. And so I would do all of that in body paragraph 1. So I'm looking at what hasn't changed from before and after the war. And then I can move into, however, what does change are taxes that get placed on the colonists. And so I could put the taxes. I could list the T tax or different taxes there. And then in body paragraph 3, I could talk about how this is going to lead to the Revolutionary War movement. So we could talk about things like the Boston Massacre or the Boston Tea Party or the meeting of the First Continental Congress that you would use as evidence. And then hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a little bit hard to wrap your heads around, but that's why we're kind of doing this in chunks. So we're trying to do the context and thesis, and then we're working to take that thesis statement that you created and use it to create this outline of your essay. All right, we will also talk about this during our Zoom meeting on Thursday morning and go over some essay outlines. I'll try to look over these before the Zoom. That way we can kind of talk about good things that you're doing and maybe some things that we need to work on as well.